Hermann, the German hero. 2 years passed, and it was early autumn of the year 9. Augustus woke one morning feeling quite brisk and in the best of spirits. Good news had come from Pannonia. The natives were again under control. Tiberius was on his way home, and a splendid triumph was being planned for him. The world seemed very bright. Augustus ate his frugal morning meal with positive relish and was just finishing a last fig when a small package was handed to him. Chief of his German bodyguards said that it had arrived during the night by special messenger from Marobotus. It appeared to be a gift. With pleasure, Augustus proceeded to unwrap it. Marobotus was a young German chieftain who had caused trouble in Vienna. Now, no doubt, he wished to show additional proof of his renewed loyalty to Rome. Then, as the contents lay revealed, the emperor's face turned gray. He stared at it as if he couldn't believe his eyes. What he saw was the head of a man cut off at the neck. "Varus," he gasped hoarsely, as he recognized the face of the former governor of Syria, whom Tiberius had left to govern the Germans near the mouth of the Rhine. "O Varus, O my legions," moaned Augustus as he learned of the full tragedy. Not only had Varus been murdered, but thousands of soldiers, almost three Roman legions, had been slaughtered by the Germans. "O Varus, Varus," he mourned, "give me back my legions." This is the story of what had happened. To the Romans, it was a tale of treachery. To Germans of later years, it would be a story of patriotism. Either way, it is one of the deciding events of the history of Europe. The chief character in the story is Hermann, a young German prince or chieftain whose Roman name was Arminius. It was Hermann that Marobotus had received the bloody head of Varus. Hermann had sent it to him, hoping, with this proof of prowess, to enlist his rival help against the Romans. But Marobotus now preferred safety to freedom and had sent the gruesome trophy on to Augustus, with sympathetic report of the disaster. Hermann, who was about 25 years old and was another one of those young Germans who had been sent to receive training as a Roman soldier and was an officer commanding one of the legions under Varus. When Varus had been sent to govern the German territory near the Weser River, young Hermann was back in his own native homeland. His father was king of one of the tribes inhabiting that half-conquered Roman province. Hermann found many of his tribesmen boil with hatred from the Romans, not all of them to be sure. They were divided. Some thought it best to accept the Roman rule and adopt Romans' more civilized way of living as well as their way of fighting. But there were just as many who resented being forced to give up their old law and customs and abide by the Roman law. They encouraged young Hermann in his dream of fighting for independence. As a beginning, he formed a daring plot against his commander. As governor, Varus had spent the summer going about, holding court here and there, handing out judgments, settling disputes in a harsh, unfeeling manner that was characteristic of him. September came, and considering that his work was done for that season, Varus was about to move from his summer quarters near the Weser River back to winter quarters on the Rhine. Just the night before leaving, however, Hermann told him at dinner that trouble had arisen between two tribes that ought to be settled before he left. It meant going northwest again into difficult country, and the winter storms were on their way. Other Germans friendly to the Romans saw and warned Varus that it was a trap. Varus laughed loudly, being a young man who was told nothing, and said that he could rely on his own judgment, that he trusted Hermann implicitly. Indeed, he so trusted that young officer that the next morning when they set out for the northwest, he put Hermann in charge of the soldiers guarding the supply wagons. It was a stormy day. Wet leaves were blowing. Hermann went along until they were well into the thick forest. Then he slipped away to gather his own troops, recruiting among the Germans. Varus and the Romans went on hacking their way through the wet, tangled thicket while the rain increased. Soon huge trees began to topple down on either side of them, trees which had been sawed half through by the Germans during the night. The second day, the attack came suddenly. As they were struggling through a swamp, whizzing out from all directions came spears and arrows, hurled by an unseen enemy hidden in the underbrush. On the third day came the end, the Romans retreating and struggling to the top of the ridge, on the very peak of which stood a ring of huge stones as an altar to the German gods. They were descending towards an open plain ahead when down upon them, like wild men, with their blond hair and beards flying in the wind, came the Germans in their iron helmets, shouting and singing songs of battle. Varius fell upon his sword, so that he was dead when they cut his head off. Only a few of the soldiers escaped to tell the tale. All the rest were dragged up to the ring of stones on the top of the mountain, and there sacrificed on the altar to the gods. Their heads were found later, fastened to trees in the sacred grove. By this victory, Hermann had gained control of all the Roman forts and outposts on the German side of the Rhine. It was feared that he might cross the river and go sweeping down through Gaul. But Tiberius, rushing to meet him, held the Rhine line secure, and that was enough to do. It was decided by both Augustus and Tiberius. Never again were the Romans to establish their authority beyond the Rhine. The Germans would remain independent, slowly, in their own way develop and become civilized. And so, by blocking the spread of the Roman civilization in Germany, this victory of Hermann changed the future of Europe. How it might have differed, what future wars might have been avoided had this not been so, no one can say. Hermann's ambition was to unite the German tribes, but this was never to be accomplished. They continued to disagree and fight with one another. Only part of Hermann's own tribe ever stood behind him, and even members of his own family were against him. He was to die 10 years later, stabbed in the back by one of his own kinsmen. But future fellow countrymen were to look back upon his young Hermann as the liberator of Germany. Poems, songs, and plays would be written about him, and today a monument, a tremendous bronze statue of this first German hero, stands on top of the mountain where the victory is said to have taken place. It is encircled by that ring of altar stones upon which the Roman soldiers were sacrificed to the old gods of Valhalla.